All right, so I took a call that I wanted to take, and a lot of times that allows me to kind of discuss things a little. Then I kind of forget my place. And we were talking specifically about memory having agency and how powerful that is. That if you could fully um, commission an entire memory from one body to the other, then time would no longer be the constraint. And perhaps you would even be able to bolster such technologies as to amplify and make that the body of those memory agency to expound upon themselves and see themselves through a more holistic totality, right? That would better serve the localized efforts of impression, right? So we are getting into whether or not AI can truly be deemed or seen through a codified networking as, like I was just talking about this moments ago, where you have within, this is not racial. This does not. This creates more of a caste that connects to race, where you could see that, and we won't even mention specific races, right? And then we won't even we won't even design what a race even means. Okay, we'll say that it's more of a Machiavellian idea, that race is based around patronage. Yes, lineage does get into it, but patronage, a shared mind, right? That cannot be refuted or separated from a memory matrix. That we look at different spherical constructs of whether this is localized, sort of a meso or middle type area where most exist within a certain bracket or parameter when we're talking about memory or agency pervading outside of us. We could even refer to this as aura. And then you go even further out where you could say that that's intelligence, that somebody who could extend themselves through a certain linear projection out into having agency that exists further away from the approximation of the so-called or assumed self as a hub, right? And really, all these microorganisms from archaea to bacteria to mitochondria and on, right? How proteins even seem to gain a certain agency and interaction within the microbiological fields that we talk about with Dr. Michael Levin, right? And certain combinates. And then you get into Penrose and Hameroff, and you're looking at microtubules and sort of a junction point, a moment where it's like, okay, cells, they have, you could call it an electromagnetic built up plasma or discharge, or even more of a energy reserve globally with our bodies. Then you can even see it, like if you want to differentiate between light and electromagnetism, where you have sort of a solution, right? A solution, a permeable solution that has to be kept in a finite form, cell to cell, and couldn't be pooled all together. And you could say that that is the production factory, that is where the vagus nerve, right, that we talked about, sort of has a control arm, and that is the control station, the network, the matrix between that sort of ganglionic mass behind your solar plexus, as it's referred to as, the vagus nerve leading up to the pons. I think I misstated that in the first video and just said pons. And then even having executive powers in this mini brain and mini nervous system, right? Where we are, through our lifetimes, are possibly learning to gain a network control, right? and that seems to be what people are prized or prided on, a network control and interface, right? Where there is a smoother operation between bridging these, using the sympathetic nervous system. In other words, you have your efferent, afferent signal responses, right? You have your rate coding signals, you have your CNS, your central nervous system, your PNS, all the plexus, and how smoothly in operation. And this does hint at the health of the organism as a whole. But when you look at like Stephen Hawking or somebody, you have to start wondering, are they tapped into something outside of them? Where is the agency coming from? And a lot of people go one way or the other, where they're looking more at a cosmic or a zodiac type of solution under the stars and star alignment, and sort of an ancient arcane mechanism of power and control. But really, you see that agency is spread out in a complex networking system, where you could look at, again, we're going to go back to the race, the aphorism that we'll use here, right, for conjecture, and say that on a localized scale, certain races, certain people, right, and perhaps race is the wrong word, but I'm using this more throughout antiquity as a term, right, that we're not talking about Madison Grant, passing of the great race, or this postulation of, the Hyperboreans north of Thrace, Hyperborea, or the Nords. Again, a lot of people go on to this area of unseen, uncharted realms that they say is charted and could be charted better through like this whole Jane Roberts Seth tapes and things like this, where you see this world emerge and a convergence make effort to take place, where you see dark CIA type operations that try to balance this out and give credence, give weight to things like, you have a consciousness, Dianetics by L. Ron Hubbard, that turns into Scientology later, and really have a great amount of credence, right? Because it leads directly into the Hinduistic notions, right? But it works in a very in a way where you're talking about consciousness coming from places and being emitted from places like the Pleiadians to the doggone the fish people, right? That are written about and spoken about several times, right? And from Sirius, right, star system. So, and however much credence you want to give that's just one postulate or posit or one way to look at things, right? But on a more localized scale, you're looking at how certain races of peoples, in their spherical ideation of reality, they sort of know that things exist outside of them globally, but they work collectively in a more tribal type system of what is the universe that's available to us now, and I just got to say I'm busy here because my son has autism, among other things, and he will call repeatedly and then hang up. And I'm not trying to be mean, but I'm just saying, and it goes right along with what we're talking about and why I've put a great deal of research and study into this phenomenon with the practicality of my own self. And there's so much information available that one couldn't one couldn't gain all the answers by reading entire encyclopedic masses of books in a lifetime and then still be able to articulate such ideas. No, we have to take file bit information, compressed file bit information by so-called experts that are vetted and deemed experts within a system that you could look at it as Metcalfe's law, you could look at it through cybernetic control arms, and then finally you have the benefactors, which you could say when you're talking about race, you couldn't separate the categorizing or the segmentation of race between said generations that authors name, the Y2K, the millennials, the X generation, and so forth, right? That the terms aside, they do give a categorical significance. So you're talking about what's more important. If I'm putting an item out for sale in the grocery store and it has a perishable scale, and scientifically we're looking at how long this turkey sandwich is going to last, from the bread to the cheese to whatever else is in there, to the turkey itself, we have to allow for a certain amount of preservation, synthetic influence, right? We have to see the organic qualities are the most important, so we have to establish certain criteria. And of course, in all these gray areas, human beings are going to, through derivation, they're going to manipulate and sift off resources, because everybody is ultimately just trying to survive, right? And so you get into this morality, this master morality, is how far will somebody go in order to survive? And it's like a pressure cooker, right? But the main thing that's left at the end is, how much agency does one really have? Because this is the prize, this is the goal. And can't we just say that agency is memory, and memory is information, right? And information may not be understood at the time of inception. That is, when you were studying calculus, trigonometry, history, geography, science in grade school, and how much was available. We get into memetics, right? Where I've disclosed what I refer to typically when I use the term memetics, that it's not just a sort of chameleon copying of a certain codified behavior, and to take that behavior on, but that gets into it a little bit, right? Definitely. But that it is, memetics really refers to a certain 181 amino acids in a codified chain that signal that the hypothalamus signals the pituitary, yes, we're going to release more of that growth hormone, right? And then which area are you looking at? Are you so close to the event? I always want to include horizon, because yes, there's like this aura, this otherworldly thing that happens outside of so-called event, no matter what the event is. And this is why there's the talk about demons and angels, is that there's an event that takes place. There's cause and effect, causality, right? But then there's this area that one could, I'm using this disambiguate as to say, I think about the term prosaic, and it's like whether or not it's said in a poetic way or said in prose. There's no way that when you talk about the ambiguation, the disambiguation of an item, a thing, an event, you're talking about an event having more power in the agency, in the memory matrix, right? As to say that area that is not, gravity is being challenged, and I've never believed in gravity. I've always talked around gravity, because I believe that things are controlled much more, and it begins with an electric universe, right, model, but that they had this science down a long time ago. And when I say they, I'm not even going to really talk about who they are. I think it goes way beyond any Vedic type postulations past the Talmud, that it's more like, I've always thought this, and I've done many meditations over the years, more into the far past, and feel like I've walked away and seen something that I can't unsee, but I can't recollect it because it's too immense, and it gets into what I referred to as the cowls, okay? Like these hooded sort of figures, and it's the only way they could really be described, but that it kind of gets into Hellraiser a little bit and Cenobites and things like that before it became really tacky and sort of hokey. But that last Hellraiser was a really good one. But it's like, what do you deem? The whole premise of that movie series is what do you deem good and evil? Well, it's a personalization. Do you really think you have the right to come to some sort of fundamental solution and then to spread that solution around as a virus, right? And to say that your needs are the most important. Well, any concrete infant thinker would posit such a thing, right? All you want to do is survive. So your survival and then your whims, your capricious whims, wants, and needs are universally ever important. And so you get into this concept where it's like, oh, what if we did that? You know, when we're talking about the they, what if we gave credence to Eve from, you know, the story of Adam and Eve? What if you gave credence to Lilith? What if you even further went in and gave credence to Tiamat, you know, or Hathor, right? When you're getting into like this whole concept of Mother Circe and these witches, and uh, what if we gave them the ability to have what they want in recreating the inferior race, the one who was born to be inferior, set to an inferior frequency, and would always be striving for through self-evaluation, self-affirmation, and lived as a flat time samsara producing on-running rendition or version of pi, right? As opposed to a phi or phi or golden mean perfection, right? And you get into this. I just posted a scientific article about X and Y and competition, and not necessarily between X and Y, but yes, and they're talking about X and Y driven, for lack of a better, we're gonna look, you know, from localized to basically just sperm, right? So, what has agency? What has faculty? What has legitimacy through legacy? What is allowed to go on through legacy? When you get into the book DNA, when you're talking about Watson, we're not going to go off on a trail with Watson and Crick and Linus Pauling and all this, but what we are going to say, and we're not going to go off into aromatic amino acids. We've already sort of hinted on this, right? But that point of uracil, right? That point DNA RNA sequencing, or you could even say resequencing. How circadian cycles that are driven really through polarity, depolarization, repolarization, right? And you even see, debatably, you see these 7 points when you're talking about the beginning to the end of this cyclical pace, that you could take the circadian rhythm and match it up with almost any other cycles and see that Earth, our planet, controlled to a grid or a matrix, is in fact being dictated to through certain calendric based cyclical conditions, and that when we look too far out as opposed to locally looking within, we're going to see the same areas of dictation that even ultimately dictate form and function, right? So and this is getting into physics because it's making statements about the constants that are in physics, right? We have to rewrite everything if we now see that even one mechanism shows a definite, irrefutable synthetic imprint on us. through a codified system to say that this has jurisdictional power and control over who and what we are, right? So you're talking about the individual in self-assumption and how that echo chamber is so fundamentally important. So if you create something like this, right, when we get into Eve, when we get into Lilith, and we go through that entire supposed mental mind chain of belief, is that, and it's even taught as a religion, is that belief in the self can only take place if one is heavily indoctrinated in dogma, as to say that you will follow this certain tradition, this pecking order, right? This principle protocol of master morality, And again, Nietzsche was genius. He saw this. He was writing the book on provisions to ward off, and to even not even warding off, but hinting at the solution to being able to survive within a memory matrix, samsara, to him flat time, right, or looping time, where you had, you didn't have to describe the witchcraft. You didn't have to describe the druidic craft. You didn't have to describe this. You only had to show the redundancy, right? And the fact that there is a redundant pattern taking place here, right? So, in summary, a lot of my propositions do take place just outside the electromagnetic field, you could say, where you're looking at what is nuclear force, what is strong and weak nuclear force. In very basic terms, what the hell is holding everything together, right? And so, throughout antiquity, this state is argued, but one would have to say, how does that differ from a Dyson sphere, where you're trying to create this abstraction, or you're trying to dilate the notion to an ever macro view, where let's imagine that we can get inside of this and figure out what in the hell is containing a body or a spherical body. And if one of those spherical bodies is under control, then the postulation that any could be under direct influence, direct power, and control to a master agenda becomes inevitable.